Hi, Maddie.
Hello.
Excuse me one moment. Hi, Ricky. I'm just calling up one other text.
Hello.
Hey, Ricky.
Hey, Maddie.
Did you didn't go over to the kitchen yet, did you?
No, Carol said she's going to go over after class.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna do.
I've got a dentist appointment I got to go to.
Okay, is everything at the kitchen or she's got it?
Well, we got desserts last night and she'll bring them with her.
Okay. Sounds good.
And some of those desserts I don't think we should put out until Saturday morning.
Oh, were you gonna walk with Fariba?
I just texted her to ask her if she wanted to still walk, because I can only do it like from 1:30 to 2:30.
Okay.
She hasn't responded, so we'll see.
Okay.
Morning.
Good morning,
Good
everyone.
morning,
I'll be with
afternoon.
you
Good morning.
in one moment. I'm just
Hi, Charlotte.
How are you guys?
setting up some texts here. There we go. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I think I got all of these correctly. Yes. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Okay.
Very
Good, good. We're going to wait a few more moments in case anybody else will be joining us. Ah, okay. Just had to make sure I had all of my texts in place. I'm assuming everyone can see the screen.
Yep.
Yes. Yes.
Good, good, good.
Rabbi, you're surrounded by women.
I noticed. It's okay with me. If we didn't have enough thesaurus,
Yeah.
we've got, first of all, the news from Israel, the news here is just horrible. But also, excuse me, I'm just getting out of something. Even in Israel, one of our Masorti congregations was attacked, as it were, and that
Where?
wait a moment, I'll tell you, I just have to admit everybody.
Gonna be up north.
No,
No?
no, this was unfortunately from ultra-Orthodox Kehilat
Oh,
Yar Ramot. Put up inflammatory public posters. So it's just, you know, it's no different than here. You know, there's so much going on that whatever side you're on, there's somebody to create a problem. So anyway, I think we've got a few more people here. So say once again, good morning, or I should say good afternoon to everyone at this point.
Good afternoon.
There is so much in this parasha because we're really into the heart of Devarim here in terms of the legal codes. Here, it's on one hand, very much national issues. It's setting up a judiciary, the rules for the king, also different rules for Kohanim. But what we're going to focus on, because there's so much more, there's also the Eglah Arufah, the unusual law of the heifer whose neck is broken when there's an unidentified homicide. Really, Shoftim v'Shotrim is a good beginning to the parasha. But we're actually going to take a look at one particular section, some of the laws of warfare, which are very complicated. We're really only going to touch upon. I'm really going to be looking at its reflection in later Jewish law. And there's so much more to be said. I'm not pretending to cover this in any kind of comprehensive fashion, just kind of like touching on it. So let's just take a look in our parasha. Let's start reading the beginning of our parasha. And some of these sections are well known, but just see what's in the biblical text, and then we'll take a look at some reflections on the biblical text. Who would like to read here, beginning of chapter 20, Perek Kaf? Thank you, Maddie.
When you take the field against your enemies and see horses and chariots, forces larger than yours, have no fear of them, for the Lord your God, who brought you from the land of Egypt, is with you. Before you join a battle, the priest shall come forward and address the troops.
This is a special Kohen, by the way, known as a Kohen HaMashuach, the anointed priest, or the priest for war. So he's going to come and deliver this message to the people.
He shall say to them, "Hear, O Israel, you are about to join battle with your enemy. Let not your courage falter. Do not be in fear or in panic or in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who marches with you to do battle for you against your enemy, to bring you victory."
And by the way, that line is used, of course, in the prayer for the IDF. Ki Adonai Elohechem holech imachem lilachem lechem im oivechem lahoshia etchem. So that line is still very relevant today.
Then the officials shall address the troops as follows. Is there anyone who has built a new house but has not dedicated it? Let him go back.
To his home.
Where?
To his home.
At the top.
To his home, lest he die in battle and another dedicate it. Is there anyone who has planted a vineyard but has not harvested it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another harvest it. Is there anyone who has paid the bride price for a wife but who has not yet married her? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another marry her. The officials shall go on addressing the troops and say, is there anyone afraid and disheartened? Let him go back to his home, lest the courage of his comrades flag like his. When the officials have finished addressing the troops, army commanders shall assume command of the troops.
Okay, so why this whole rigmarole before the battle? Why all of these declarations? Or why do you think?
That's the exact same thing happens today. Just read any history of the Second World War. Before people go into battle, there's always a rousing speech. Eisenhower's before D-Day. We have Rabin's before the Six-Day War.
Mm-hmm.
This is, you don't send people off to battle without basically giving them, the general gets up there and makes a point about what you're fighting for.
Yeah. And so that's very, very important. First of all, you have to rouse the troops. And then why all of these qualifications? This is, it's not.
They want to make sure that, when there's people would go out to battle, that their head, so to speak, is in the battle.
Exactly. You don't want people who are going to weaken your army by being scared, by, not having their minds on. You have to go in, you have to be focused. And so, all that, none of this is unusual throughout history. This is what happens. Now let's go on a little bit. Getting more into the weeds of when you approach.
When you approach a town to attack it, you shall offer it terms of peace. If it responds peaceably and lets you in, all the people present there shall serve you at forced labor. If it does not surrender to you, but would join battle with you, you shall lay siege to it. And when the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, you shall put all its males to the sword. You may, however, take as your booty the women, the children, the livestock, and everything in the town, all its spoil, and enjoy the use of the spoil of your enemy, which the Lord your God gives you.
Okay, so as you begin the battle, what's the first thing? Yehudi?
I've seen already two really bad translation mistakes since you began. Since when does eras mean pay, put down a bride price? It means betroth, you know?
Right.
And the second one here, offer a terms of peace. That's not what it means. It means offer a peaceful surrender terms. You know, that's a completely different thing altogether. I mean, that also is standard procedure in field warfare down to the present day. I mean, just read the Battle of the Bulge. The German commander says to the Americans surrounded at Bastogne, white flag surrender terms. And Michaeloup, our American general, says nuts, you know, which means I'll fight to the end. But that's all this means. And Shalom here doesn't mean anything to do with peace. It means peaceful surrender, meaning you stop the fighting by putting up the white flag and going into captivity.
Yeah, well, that's what they say. If it
But
responds
peace is sort of
peaceably,
a, bad term here. Surrender is the correct translation of the Hebrew. You should call upon them to surrender. And if you want, you can put a parenthesis peacefully. Obviously, it's peacefully if it's surrender.
yeah, and if they don't peaceably surrender,
All right, the words in Tanakh in several other situations. To shalom basically means to surrender. In other words, it's not like this is the only place. If you research, it's a hard word to research, but you won't have any problem finding at least 10 examples where shalom means to surrender and not anything to do with the usual meanings of prosperity, welfare, mashlomcha. That's a sub meaning of it, but it's in this context, it's important to identify what you're saying here. In other words,
yes.
if they surrender, then you let them become slaves. If they don't surrender, we're going to kill every single last one. Give them a choice.
Right. And then going on, because there's still a further, there's a qualification now. Go ahead, Maddie.
Thus you shall deal with all towns that lie very far from you, towns that do not belong to nations hereabout. In the towns of the latter peoples, however, which the Lord your God is giving you as a heritage, you shall not let a soul remain alive. No, you must proscribe them, the Hittites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you, lest they lead you into doing all the abhorrent things that they have done for their gods, and you stand guilty before the Lord your God.
Okay, so a little bit of a qualification. Yes, you may first offer terms of surrender, but this is all for the towns that are distant. But the towns that are in Canaan, the nations that you're supposed to uproot, no. You just destroy them utterly. And these are what are called the cherem traditions, the traditions of totally prescribing the Canaanites and the Shiva Amamim, the 7 Canaanite nations. And this is very clear in Sefer Devarim that this is what you're supposed to do. But as you can see, there's a little bit of as it presents the laws of warfare, there are a number of different kind of perspectives here. They have to clarify these cherem traditions. To some extent, this was a little bit in conflict with them, and thus they have to qualify it. So that's just some general laws of warfare. There are others in the Tanakh. I mean, the whole issue of the cherem traditions is very, very important. In fact, in Jeffrey T. Gay's commentary in Deuteronomy for the new JPS translation, he has an entire excursus on the prescriptions of the Canaanites. And we can come back to that. But for now, I just want to take a look at some halachic responses to some of these texts. So let me, excuse me, I just have to move everybody for a moment. No, this is not what I wanted. Here we go. And I'm going to increase the size. There we go. Okay. So, commenting, I'm just going to begin with a couple of commentaries and just like lay out some of the terms that Jewish tradition will refer to this, which will refer to warfare. So first of all, Sforno's comment on the beginning of our parasha, Ki tetzeh lemilchama al oivecha, when you go into battle against your enemies. Who would like to read?
I can, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you, Ricky.
When you go out to battle outside the boundaries of the land of Israel, regarding an obligatory war, no one is allowed to be exempt from army service, even a bridegroom from his bridal chamber and a bride from her wedding canopy.
Okay, so here he's explaining when you go out to war, this is outside the boundaries of the land of Israel, chutz la'aretz. Because you have what they call milchemet mitzvah. You know, I probably should use the Hebrew because the English terms hello? Because the English terms are not really sufficient in translating these things, but I'm just using some general translations. Milchemet mitzvah is literally an obligatory war, a war of commandment. You know, we are commanded, and this would certainly include the cherem traditions, that we are commanded to destroy the Shiva Amamim. We are commanded to destroy Amalek. That is unquestionable. These are unquestionably a milchemet mitzvah. And the other is a milchemet reshut, which we'll see defined here. This is Otsar Dinim Uminhagim, which is just a convenient source for defining them. Okay, go on, Ricky.
Milchemet mitzvah, obligatory war, and milchemet reshut, war of permission. There is a war of commandments or obligatory war, and there is a war of permission.
And now he's going to explain them.
An obligatory war is the war against the 7 nations of Canaan and against Amalek, for which Israel is commanded. It is considered an obligatory war to defend against an enemy, that which Israel is commanded. It is considered an obligatory war to defend against an enemy that attacks them. For an obligatory war will go out, even a bridegroom from the bridal chamber and a bride from her chuppah. For such a war, the king does not have to seek permission from the Sanhedrin.
Okay, so a couple things here. Clearly identifying an obligatory milchemet mitzvah, as I mentioned, a war against the Shiva Amamim and against Amalek. But here we also have another line. That's milchemet chova lahagein miyad sonei sheba aleihem, to defend against an enemy that attacks them. That's not necessarily part of the Canaanite, you know, the milchemet mitzvah that involves the Canaanite and Amalek. Now, Amalek is certainly an enemy that has attacked them, no question. But so what is in terms of a milchemet mitzvah? What are the conditions for the country?
Defensive.
Yeah, defensive. And what else? Who is obligated?
Everyone.
Everyone.
Everyone. There's no question.
Everybody.
Everybody. You know, and a remarkable, the rabbis just a remarkable, you know, even a bride and even a groom and a bride, you know, it's really A very powerful statement.
The verse comes from Tanakh, and they're just pulling it out in order to make a point.
Right.
It's from Yoel. That's how he compares the locust plague as if it's an invading army.
Right.
That's where the mashal comes from.
Okay. And this is a war the king just says, yeah, we got to fight it. Doesn't have to ask the permission of the Sanhedrin. To some extent, he doesn't have to ask Congress. Now, here's how they describe here, Milchemet Reshut, a war of permission. Again, it's not really a great translation. Milchemet Reshut. Go ahead, Ricky.
However, a war of permission in order to expand the boundary of Israel, as did King David, the king, cannot force the people to go out to war without the permission of the Sanhedrin, for they represent the authority of the people.
Kind of interesting here. So the king does not have absolute power, and there's war, and there's war. It's a defensive war, which has a certain obligation. But then there's, war to expand territory, strategic reasons. Doesn't mean it's illegitimate, just simply that it's, this requires the people and the leadership of the people to agree to it.
By the way, there's a story in the Tanakh that sort of backs that up to some extent. It doesn't, of course, it doesn't have the word Sanhedrin in the Tanakh. It'll say Zekanim, but after all, Parshat Shoftim doesn't have the word Sanhedrin either.
Right.
But there's a story in chapter 20 of the first book of Kings that Achav has done what he thinks is a peaceful surrender to Ben-Hadad II, the king of Aram, Syria today. And but it turns out that what he thought was a peaceful surrender meant that he had to pay taxes or tribute. Turns out that the king of Syria expects not to take everything Achav has, including his wives, his children, lock, stock, and barrel. And at this point, Achav says, no, if that's the case, let's go to war. But he asked the Zekanim, and he convenes, and I'm not going to call it a full-blown assembly, because after all, Sanhedrin is not a full-blown assembly either. It's a selected group of people, right? So, but at least you see it, that in the Deuteronomistic history, people are following the way they saw, the way things should be done. In other words, that, if Haram had attacked them, they wouldn't have had to do that. But now Achav wants to go do a preventative war. Okay, so for that he has to basically get the Zekanim together. The story itself is neutral about Achav's wickedness until it comes to the end. It's quite a long chapter, but it's a living example of how this works in practice.
And also brought up the important idea that we talk about Deuteronomy. It's not just Sefer Devarim. It's really a whole editorial perspective on the historical books of Yoshua through Malachim. And, that it has its own unique perspectives, which again, Sefer Devarim has its own unique style. And this was recognized very early on by biblical scholars. And to some extent, we also have to think about the historical background. This is, scholars constantly point out that this is an important consideration when taking a look at Sefer Devarim and its cherem traditions, its traditions of totally prescribing your enemies. And because otherwise, and I mentioned this before, that one of the books that is most concerned with tzedek, which justice and righteousness, is in fact Sefer Devarim. Constantly talking about caring for the poor, the widow, the orphan, the stranger. There's a lot of social legislation in Sefer Devarim. There's a lot of, today we might call social justice, but for Judaism, it's the way society's supposed to run.
But you left out the rabbi has to be taking care of that, so it'll be him.
No, that's true. That's true. That's very, very true. Especially because I'm negotiating my contract this year. So, but um, in many ways, we understand a little bit of the cherem traditions because they are being gathered and edited at the time that Israelite power is beginning to push away Assyria. Assyria, which had, we talked about how Sefer Devarim reflects, in particular, the vassal treaties of Esarhaddon, but we're pushing off the Assyrian yoke, which came pretty much with the Syrian religion. So the reason that we're supposed to wipe out the Canaanites is because they will be a terrible influence on Israelites, bringing us not just into idolatry, but idolatrous practices like child sacrifice and all these horrible things. That's why we have to utterly wipe them out. But its background is probably the vehemence against Assyria. Yes, Yehudi?
I think it has to be pointed out that though Sefer Devarim prescribes this or prescribes it, I think, like a prescription, no one ever actually proceeded to fulfill this. In other words,
Right.
the Canaanim is still around in the times of David and Solomon, and basically Solomon uses them as temple builders and as transporters and this, that, and the other thing. And furthermore, he has a very fine working alliance with the Canaanim from the north, who aren't any real
Right.
different than the ones in his own country. So, in other words, Sefer Devarim and Sefer Yoshua make it sound like this is, to some extent, a complete wipeout. But the first chapter of Sefer Shoftim already tells you that this was not the case at all.
Mhm.
We had a limited penetration into a certain amount of territory, primarily in mountains. We never really reached the coast at all, and certainly none of the stuff that was ordered to happen was ever actually happened. And I don't think anybody ever took it seriously. I think it was simply meant to be said that's what they deserved. And I think that's
Uh-huh.
basically what the point of it was.
Yeah, I mean, Deuteronomy, I mean, it's structured as these speeches of Moshe, but they're very often his sermons.
That's what they
So,
are.
this is
That's what they are,
sermonic
Rabbi Poppy.
material as much as it's legal or
When a rabbi makes a
historical.
speech, it's a sermon.
Right.
It's a degree of hyperbole. I mean, think about the end of Bamidbar, wipe out the Midianites, and then we wiped them completely out. And 2 generations later,
In Gideon's time.
exactly,
Right.
you got the Midianites attacking again, so they weren't wiped out.
It's even among ourselves. According to the end of Sefer Shoftim, the tribe of Benjamin was so wiped out in the civil war that there were
Right.
barely enough of them left over to marry a few of them off to some women. And basically, next thing you know, the next king is coming from that tribe. So, somewhere along the line, something's going wrong here. Okay. In other words, I remember Diane Sharon, one of the students in class, asked, what are we going to do about the contradictions in the book of Joshua and a book of Judges? She said, look upon them as two different versions of the conquest and don't try to do anything about it.
Right.
Right. And Amalek as well. We're supposed to wipe out Amalek, but Amalek keeps popping up. And so we've talked about that. Okay.
Well, we
I
do
just,
wipe them out to a large extent, but in
right.
Chizkiyahu's time, a contingent of people from Shevet Shimon, this is towards the very end of the fourth chapter of 1 Chronicles, pretty much Vayaku et She'erit ha'pleta ashela Amalek. That means in English, they wiped whatever was left over from them. So as a practical matter, they're no longer around. In other words, assigning Haman to Amalek is another one of these midrashic, inner biblical midrash, but still midrash, In other words, they're no longer a real threat. You don't even hear them mentioned in Second Temple times.
So coming to the commentaries, this is, I just had to put this in, this first Rashi, because I think it sometimes is, have to think about when we're involved in war, what is required. It may or may not be required, but he says, al oivecha, against your enemies. You beinecha koivim. They have to be in your eyes as enemies. Al terachem aleihem. Don't have pity on them. Ki lo yirachamu alecha, because they're not going to have any pity on you. And sometimes, war is hell. There are reasons why we say this. It's horrible for the people who are involved in the war. It's certainly horrible for all of the civilians who get caught up in it, the devastation. There's nothing good about war. But sometimes, and we're struggling with this now. Israel is fighting a multi-front war. Not just to get, the whole, I'm sorry, I have to be a little political here. The whole notion of asking for a ceasefire, and Hamas wants a ceasefire. There's something absurd about that, because this is an organization whose raison d'etre is to destroy Israel. So, there's no real ceasefire. I mean, yeah, there could be a ceasefire, but there's no end to the war. Well, they still want to destroy us, and we have to realize that to some extent, aside from the fact that the world has a tendency to behave as if the only country with any agency in the Middle East is Israel, no other country seems to have any impact on the world other than Israel or what goes on there. It's only Israel. We're also involved in a war against Hezbollah, the Houthis to some extent, and basically Iran. And these are countries that are not, they're not really countries that one can negotiate with so clearly. So, sometimes you have to recognize who your enemy is, as much, and we'll come back to compassion and war, etc. But anyway, so let's go on to Rashi's comment here. Would somebody else like to continue? Kiti Krav El Ir, here at the bottom of the page.
I'll read, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte.
Speaking of a millennium reshut, as it is explained in this section. Thus you are to do to all the towns, those exceedingly far from you.
Yeah, so that's basically when it says, it's the verse that's talking about the karata Allah shalom. You offer terms of surrender, that is supposed to be just for a milchemet reshut. Milchemet mitzvah, there's no kriya shalom. At least that's how Rashi is interpreting it. But let's take a look now, first of all, at Rambam.
We do
Again,
not wage war against anyone in the world until they are offered the opportunity of peace, whether a war of permission or an obligatory, as Deuteronomy 20:10 states. When you approach a town to wage war against it, you shall offer it terms of peace. If the enemy accepts the offer of peace and commits itself to the fulfillment of the 7 mitzvot that were commanded to Noah's descendants, none of them should be killed. Rather, they should be subjugated, as 2011 states. They shall serve you at forced labor. If they agree to tribute but do not accept subjugation, or if they accept subjugation but do not agree to tribute, their offer should not be heeded. They must accept both. Okay, so here Rambam, in his law code, this is Hilchot Melachim, Law of Kings and Warfare. What's the shift that he makes here when he's, as it were, commenting on this verse? How does he understand this verse? To whom, in what cases does this apply?
If your enemy is willing to accept the terms that you impose.
Right.
Yeah, but he says any enemy, not
Right.
he's going dead against the pshat here. Okay.
Right.
This is the Rambam against the pshat. You can find this all over the place.
Right.
One day I think I'm gonna write a book of Rambam against the pshat.
Oh yeah, that's
he specializes in it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Listen, his commentaries also talk about how he goes against the pshat of the Gemara. So, Rambam is a big proponent of Rambam. Anyway, yeah, so he's applying it in a much more universal way. Yes, he's emphasizing that they have to accept the terms of surrender. They've got to accept all the terms of surrender. It's not like, oh, we'll take this, but not that, but no, they have to accept it. But nonetheless, he's broadening it to this is how we wage war. Now, it's interesting when he talks about subjugation. He goes on, talks about it's basically all the things that the Muslims did to the Jews. So, because he's living in a Muslim country. Okay, so that's Rambam is the background. And now we come to Sefer HaChinuch. This is an anonymous work. Well, here, you can read here the footnote. Charlotte, number 1.
Sefer
HaChinuch.
HaChinuch is an anonymous work written in 13th century Spain that clearly details the 613 commandments and explains the reasons behind them. For each commandment, the author cites a biblical source, addresses the philosophical underpinnings of the commandment, presents a brief overview of the details of its observance, and summarizes the commandment's applicability.
Yeah, so I just quoted from the blurb on Sfaria. And this is a very important book. One, it goes through the mitzvot through the order of the Torah. And it's the book of education. It's trying to educate people. Here's the Torah, and here's how we understand these mitzvot. And it's still very much used today. Okay, so let's take a look at what he has to say, commenting really on our verse.
To send peace to the cities that we besiege, that we were commanded in our fighting against a city by way of what is optional, that we want to fight against it, and that is what is called an optional war, that we assure them that we will not kill them if they make peace with us and become our servants, meaning to say that they raise a tax for our king and they be subdued under us.
Yeah, so yeah, that's clear, But again, what kind of war is this?
Shoot.
Yeah, the optional war, the Milchemet Reshut, exactly. He's not quite going so far as Rambam. Go on.
But if they do not make peace with us in the manner mentioned, we are commanded to kill all of their males in that city that have reached maturity, and we take for ourselves the children and the women and all of its booty. And about all of this, they, may their memory be blessed,
Talking about the rabbis,
said that it was an optional war. And they said in Sefri Devarim 200, if they said, we accept the taxes upon ourselves, but not the subjugation, or subjugation but not taxes, we do not listen to them until they accept this and that upon themselves.
Yeah, so basically he's quoting the rabbinic tradition of how we subject the peoples. And again, if they accept the terms of surrender, they have to accept all of the terms.
Right.
It's not a partial. And now we get into a little bit more thought on this mitzvah, which I think is very, very important. Whether we agree with everything that Sefer HaChinuch says, he's raising, I think, a very important issue here. Go ahead.
It is from the roots of the commandment that it is because the trait of mercy is a good trait, and it is fitting for us, the holy seed, to practice in all of our matters. Even if the enemies are idolaters, it is for our stature, not for the angle of their being fit for mercy and kindness.
Yeah, so first of all, what is the reason that, we first offer peace? What's the midah, the character, the personal characteristic that we're supposed to learn from all of this?
Mercy.
Mercy. And it has nothing to do with the people we're showing mercy to. It's our own character that we have to watch. We're the holy seed, Zera HaKodesh. Zera HaKodesh. We are God's people. This is the way we are supposed to behave, period. And I think that is very much part of the various discussions in Israel about how we deal with Palestinians, how we conduct wars, how, all of this stuff. And one could be, have different positions, but still there is a very strong sense that we're supposed to behave in a certain way because we're Jews. It's not that the Palestinians or this Arab country, that Arab country deserves it. That's irrelevant. It's who are we? How are we defining ourselves through our actions? And I think in general, this is an important issue. I mean, I think we struggle with it here in America as well. Who are we as Americans? What do we want our nation to be? So it's not just, and it doesn't mean there's one answer to this, or in any given situation, it's absolutely clear what one does. But certainly for the Jewish people, but I think as well as Americans, we want to be known as good people, as compassionate people. And how does that affect our behavior? Go on. And then there's a more practical side.
And also because this thing has a benefit to us, that our king have servants that serve him and always raise him a tax and do his work if he needs, without his expending any expenses on them at all. And there is no benefit to us in killing them, since they want to stay subdued under us. But rather there will be destruction in the thing and in its teaching us the trait of cruelty. And the one who hears it will revile us. And we are commanded about this to benefit us in all that we have mentioned.
So on one hand, it's like, if we enslave them, this is great. We get the labor, we get the financial benefit, but, it's not only because we're supposed to be compassionate or merciful, but we're also not supposed to be, what are we not supposed to be according to this?
Cruel.
Cruel. Yeah. So again, it's a struggle with our values. Who we are is very much based on our values. One moment, Yehudi. So, for example, one could say that the 3 mitzvot that we identify as Yehareg V'al Ya'avor, be killed rather than transgress these things, public blasphemy, murder, adultery. If we're willing to commit those crimes, then who are we? These are basic values. Go ahead, Yehudi.
Very same chapter I mentioned before, chapter 20 of Malachim Aleph goes on, and Achav and Israelites win a decisive victory before Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, is hiding somewhere. And then one of his advisors says to him, therefore, let's try to surrender and see if he'll basically let us surrender peacefully. I mean, of course, what that really means is they're handing themselves over. And guess what? Achav actually invites Ben-Hadad to get up on the chariot with him. And of course, one of the prophets then proceeds to denounce Achav. That whole story ends up making Achav look bad for not, dispatching Ben-Hadad on the spot. But whatever the agenda of Malachim is, you can't get around the fact that here you have 2 generals from the other side saying, behold, we know that the kings of Israel are known for their
mercy.
Well, I don't know. The word chesed is a mercy.
Okay, chesed. Okay,
their obligations under
there.
international law, treaties, whatever. But that would be essentially the context here. But it doesn't change the fact that part of treating people the right way, aside from all the other considerations, which are sure are primary, the secondary consideration is that basically you want to get a good reputation.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on.
From the laws of the commandment commanded are what they, may their memory be blessed, said laws of kings and wars,
Yeah, so that's, in this, he's basically just quoting Rambam.
that the law of the call for peace is with every place, meaning to say whether in a commanded war or in an optional war.
And now he's going to agree with Rambam.
And a commanded war is, for example, against the 7 Canaanite nations and Amalek. And with all, if they make peace with us, meaning to say they took upon themselves the tax and servitude, and likewise that they took upon themselves the 7 commandments, we do not
which includes avoiding idolatry.
Right. Yeah.
And
So I mean,
murder,
this is
and-
a big
That's
and
an
deny.
important point, I think.
Let's idolatry is the least of the 7. What it really means is to avoid doing things that basically are considered capital crimes. Bein adam l'chavero. That's
Yeah.
what the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach are.
Yeah. So yeah, again, just
I
quick
didn't
note.
mean idolatry is bowing down to an idol.
Yeah.
Well, then use a different word.
Yeah. So just to clarify, when we talk about the 7 commandments, the Shiva mitzvot b'nei Noach, rabbinic tradition understood that there were 7 basic commandments that all moral people should follow. And the descendants of Noah, not necessarily Jews, but any non-Jewish culture that follows these 7 commandments, we should have compassion upon them. We should respect them because they're so to some
Robbery is
extent,
one of them. Gezo.
yeah. So to some extent, it's not just that they're willing to accept subjugation and tribute, but that they're willing to follow some basic moral code.
That excludes Hamas again, by the way.
Yeah.
we do not kill a soul from them, and they will be for tribute and serve us. But when they do not make peace, there is a distinction between a commanded war and an optional war. Did I miss something?
No, you're right.
That in a commanded war, we do not keep a soul alive, whereas in an optional war, we keep their children and women alive, as we wrote adjacently. And likewise, in an optional war, we leave one side of a besieged city open, that they can run away from there, as it is found in Sefer
Sifrei Bamidbar.
Bamidbar.
Yeah, Sifrei is the
157.
early rabbinic midrash. We have it on Bamidbar. We also have it on Devarim, on Deuteronomy. It's the early rabbinic midrashim.
And we learn this from that which is written, Numbers 31:7. And they gathered upon Midian as the Lord commanded. But in a war against the 7 nations, we encircle them from all sides. However, we nonetheless inform them first that if their will is to leave the city and go away, the option is in their hand.
So, again, spelling out a little bit more, and it all based on rabbinic tradition here, is that, we still would wipe them out except for their the children who have not reached maturity and their women, and we can take, but but we also give an option for leaving, which I think Israel has certainly tried to do in Gaza. A little bit more complicated, but okay. But it's interesting to see how, and remember, this is a writer in the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages was not necessarily a time of tremendous enlightenment. Certainly not in general culture, and not even in Jewish culture in many ways. And yet, we see that
and not a terribly peaceful time.
Right. And it may not have been totally theoretical because, as we in the period of the Golden Age, we had Jews that were commanding armies. Yeah, so it's but the fact is that at least within the yeshiva, as it were, when we're studying these texts, there's, as the Sefer Chinuch reflects on it, it's like there's also an element of who we are as a people. What are our values? Okay, finish off this section.
And also from this matter is
Oh,
that
sorry, did you have a question? Carol, or
Yeah,
comments?
I mean, we're reading this and all the comments and everything, but the people who lived, in the biblical period here, they didn't have access to all these commentaries. So, and God certainly doesn't write it all in the Torah. So are we supposed to believe that they knew all these stipulations, that Moses somehow handed it down to them along with the written Torah? That's what I don't get. I mean,
How, Carol, how orthodox are you?
how Orthodox am I?
If
I
you're
wouldn't even say
Orthodox,
orthodox.
yes,
I
Hashem
wouldn't even say
handed it all out,
orthodox.
all that. But if you're not Orthodox, then you see a little bit of historical development.
Well, I think even if you are orthodox,
Yeah, I'm
there
up
have
for
been,
that, Rabbi Zucker. What do you mean? I see historical development.
yeah,
I talk about it all
yeah.
the time.
The Torah.com was started by
And Orthodox
scholars who see
Jew.
themselves as
Right.
orthodox.
Yeah.
I mean, Mark Brettler, who is, a top biblical scholar, davens in an Orthodox shul.
What does that have to
Which
do with the price of eggs?
I,
No,
I would
Well,
not.
no, but what I'm saying is that it's not just an
Even
Orthodox
though David
perspective.
Steinberg regards himself as Haredi, I wonder how much his congregation
Right.
watches his
The
writings.
point, yeah, let's come back to Carol's point. I wouldn't, here I'm not trying to make distinctions between conservative, Orthodox, Reform. I think what is one's perspective on the tradition? The extreme position within Jewish tradition is that everything was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. That, yes, he had the tablets of the Ten Commandments, but he had the Mishnah in one pocket and, Sifrei in the other. And you'll have that position stated, but in general, I would say Jewish tradition has a tendency to look at the fact that there is what's written in the Bible, and there is how it's interpreted by the rabbis and the rabbis throughout the generations. I mean, conservative Judaism likes to talk about continuous revelation, that our experience of God continues as we study God's word, as we study the tradition. But I think that Judaism,
I mean, you've got the
very
beautiful
much.
story in Menachot 28.
That's what I was just going to say, Rabbi
Right. Go ahead.
Zucker.
Yeah.
You go ahead and say it. I'll lower my hand.
Basically, Moshe Rabbeinu gives Hashem tzuras for generations. I want to say I've heard about this Akiva. I want to see what's going on.
Right.
Let me go back and see. So Hashem finally says, "Okay, I'm going to give you a day in his academy." So where does Moshe Rabbeinu get to sit? Behind the final row, like in law school. If you are good, you're up front, and if you're a lousy student, you're in the back. Moses behind everything, and he doesn't understand a thing. He taps the shoulder of the guy ahead of him, and they try to figure out what's going on, and he's completely lost until someone up front asks Akiva, "Where's this from?" And Akiva says, "That's a halacha de Moshe Sinai." It goes back to Moses at Sinai. Moses hears his name. He signals to God, they haven't forgotten me. That's good. Good. Done. But what is the point making?
Yeah.
That Moses doesn't understand Akiva.
Even.
And of course, the corollary is Akiva may not understand Moses all that well.
Right.
They don't say that,
enough.
but that's implicit in the story.
Yeah. I mean, you have also I would quote the rest of the story, but it's a little.
That's a little heavy.
Yeah. But there's a recognition. I mean, there's a recognition already in the Torah that the law evolves. Even after Sinai, Moshe does not know everything to be done. He has to turn to God and say, what do we do here? In Benot Tzlov and, other cases. And, the fact is that the rabbis and later rabbis, medieval rabbis, not just modern rabbis, will provide interpretations that may or may not be in accord with the pshat of the biblical text, and recognize, I mean, even Rambam, the great rationalist in many ways,
I was waiting for that.
yeah,
Tell
when he
Carol
talks,
about what happened to the poor Rambam for going against the
well,
Torah.
I won't talk about, but the fact is that when we do, you have he includes within his law code all the laws for sacrifices. However, in his Mishnah, in his Moreh Nevuchim, he talks about God gave us the sacrifices because the people understood then, that was how they worshiped God. That was how they understood. But now we don't need it anymore. And even the rabbi said that, a great story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and the rabbi walking in the ruins of Jerusalem. And, the one sees the fox. He says, "Oi, the place that offered kapara, atonement for Israel, is in ruins." And Ben Zakkai says, "Oh, well, we've got a better thing than the altar. We've got deeds of loving kindness." So, I think that on one hand, the Bible serves as the foundation and is taken very, very seriously. On the other hand, we recognize that biblical law evolves. I mean, law evolves. I mean, even in America.
I mean, we've got a
We have a
constitution that works very similarly.
But we don't follow the Constitution exactly. First of all, there's so many laws that,
the Constitution is whatever the Supreme Court says it is.
Right.
That's how we actually operate.
Yeah.
You think George Washington would have thought? I mean, that's a very good example, by the way, Rabbi Zucker. Essentially, and that would be good for you too, Cal. What do you think the founders would have thought if they saw how things are going in this country today as the way things were accepted by them? And that's just 250 years. If I live long enough, it'll be in 2026.
Yeah. So here, and the last part's talking about how, in the case of war, the army and the front line, they could do whatever they need to sustain themselves. And again, emphasize this, you emphasize at the end. I just wanted to jump ahead because, at one time, even for Rambam, for Sefer Chinuch, for much, even for the rabbis, for much of Jewish history, a lot of this was theoretical. It's no longer theoretical. It's very, very real. And actually, I just did a quick Google search. I didn't really have time to say, the rules of engagement for the IDF. And actually, what came up was a lot of articles about people discussing whether or not Israel is following its own rules of engagement, what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I did want to bring in some stuff from the website of the Israeli Defense Forces, talking about, what their values are. And first of all, their mission. Every ground, aerial, naval operational activity and exercise we conduct is first and foremost carried out for the sake of defending the state of Israel and its civilians. So, here you get a sense of milchemet mitzvah in defending. Hence, it's called Tzahal, Tzva Haganah Yisrael, the Israeli Defense Forces. We face terrorist organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah, and Islamic Jihad, all of which pose a regional international threat. We further leverage our capabilities to provide humanitarian aid to countries worldwide in times of crisis and developing groundbreaking technologies and tactics in the field of defense, which is something the world often forgets. We focus on maintaining the security of Israeli citizens every single day, but our activities aim to contribute to the overall safety of civilians elsewhere. So that, there is a much more universal application than, we're talking about milchemet mitzvah, milchemet reshut. It's, part of our mission is really, we're concerned about people, period. And then it talks about, the role of the courage, loyalty, and diversity, et cetera, et cetera. Their goal is security, but Here we come to some of their values. Would somebody like to read here? Anyone else? I mean, I can just go on. The spirit of the IDF, Ruach Tzahal, the spirit of the IDF outlines our values, and together with the practical rules derived from it, constitutes our ethical code, guiding our soldiers and commanders in their day-to-day and operational activities. So, first fundamental value is to protect Israel and its citizens. Then, of course, patriotism, loyalty to Israel. I can imagine that goes hand in hand. This is true for, I would imagine, any national army in any country, but also important, human dignity. The IDF and our soldiers are obligated to protect human dignity. Every individual is of inherent value, regardless of their ethnicity, religion, nationality, gender, or status. That frankly comes directly from the Bible, that everyone is created b'tselem Elohim. And then also that statehood, the IDF is the People's Army, the State of Israel's military, subject to the law and government of the State of Israel. IDF soldiers will operate with their mission. The IDF's values and the security of Israel is their priority. They will operate with integrity, practicality, and presentably. So, we don't have time to really look at all this. We've really come to the end
There's
of
a
our
new
time.
book, though, called Ethics of Our Fighters,
Yes.
which is available on Kindle, and I think for a pretty reasonable price. And it's all about what you're being so smart. And I really think it's very nice that you put this together with Parshat Shoftim.
Yeah. That's by Shmuel Brody, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's written a lot on the ethics of the IDF. And I haven't read the book, but it looked very, very, very good. Hartman does tons of stuff. In fact, many years ago, when I was studying at Hartman, the rabbinic seminary, one of the themes was war. So Shlomo Brody, Hartman, there are a lot of people who discuss this all the time. And they're ongoing issues for Israel right now. We're in a very, very painful struggle as the nation, the leadership, everyone is like, what are the goals in this war? It's certainly the destruction of Hamas, but is that in conflict with our other major goal? That is the rescue of the hostages. And there's a lot written.
And I
You
think
can
we
look
have
at
a
all.
goal to get some more. It's hard to believe that they're going to end this war and not either get him out of the country or kill him.
Yeah. It's though everyone
Just
was
like we had to get Hitler, the war wouldn't be over until Hitler was killed.
Yeah, like we were certainly Israel was condemned quite a bit when it took out various Hamas leadership and Hezbollah leadership, and like how could you kill the guy who was negotiating with you? Well, does Hamas really negotiate? And but it's hard. These are very difficult decisions. And
You haven't
so
killed
the laws
anybody
of
who doesn't
warfare.
have blood on their hands, Rabbi Papa.
Well, no, of course. But it's also what takes the priority, what is the operational priority at any given time? What is the strategic priority at any given time? And reasonable people and people who know have a lot more than I do, can disagree about that. But it goes back to the Bible that it's not just, and I think the point that Sefer Chinuch makes is that, who are we as a people? What are our values? And how do we even put our values into place at the worst of times in war? I remember it's something that stays with me on Yom HaZikaron. The radio constantly plays stories in Israel, stories about the people who have been killed in the various conflicts. And I remember one soldier talking about his commander. He said, "Hu lacham b'chesed." He fought with loving kindness. In other words, he was doing his job, but he was not doing it to be brutal. He was not doing it to kill people. He was there to defend Israel. And try to do it in as moral a way as possible. And it's just something that we have to think about with this parasha. There's a lot we have to think about with this parasha. It's an incredibly rich parasha. They all are, but just something that's unfortunately in Yan Yoma matters of the day. So I wish
Rabbi Poppy.
him to you, and I wish
Shabbat
everybody
shalom.
well, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you,
Shabbat
Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
Take care.
Kol tov.
Great seeing you.